All right, welcome everybody. This video is focused on the Computer Science A, and in particular Computer Science A exam. So for those of you that are interested in going beyond what we offer in our standard CS principles and our standard CodeTrain packages, I do teach CSA, and I do have some information available on how I do that in some other sites. So let me know if you're interested in getting some of that. But this is sort of going to give you an overview of what the exam is. In the process, we'll talk a little bit more detail what's in the content as well. So first of all, the CSA, of course, is the more it's the more advanced programming course of the two College Board AP courses for computer science, and this one truly reaches university level content. So the easiest way to kind of look at it, I'll go back to that in a second. Here is sort of the overview of the different units. This is what we're actually particularly looking at as percentages on the multiple choice exam, which I'll talk about in just a second. But you can see that the units include primitive types. They're talking about the primitive Java, because remember AP CSA is Java only. So the Java data types, your ints, your doubles, your floats, your Boolean, your string variables. Then we get into using objects. I guess strings are technically objects. So this is like just the act of using standard Java methods and things like that we commonly use in Java. Then we get into your Boolean and your if statements. Then you get into your looping. Then you get into your object-oriented programming stuff. So we create our own classes worth of objects. Then we have sort of our three major data types that I expect the students to know and know well: an array list, and to a little bit of a lesser extent a 2D array. For sure, there's a 2D array question though on the written response, so it's something you can't just blow off. It's something you definitely have to have significant time for. And then you go into the advanced object-oriented programming concept of inheritance, and finally your advanced methods concept of recursion. And so there's quite an extensive and detailed course. The details on those, I can show you. Actually, it's probably easier to show you through here. The details of those are available in the classroom, so I was going to jump to in a second, but I changed my mind. I'll just go up to the top here and go to the table of contents. So if you want to look at, say, what's under using objects, you can see that there is a page kind of summarizing the topic, and then here's your unit at a glance with your major topics, your suggested skills they're supposed to go through, and then there's some sample instructional activities, then it goes into the next set. So here's the breakdown. Sorry, I should actually clarify that. So here's the unit at a glance, and then here, a couple pages later, is the breakdown of each of those topics. So topic 2.1 is using instances of a class, 2.2 creating and storing objects, 2.3 calling a void method, etc. Okay, so that's sort of the way that you kind of structure the curriculum on this. Now, let me see if I can find back where I was a minute ago. 189, I believe, is the page I was on. All right, so the entire AP course for CSA is measured on a single exam, which is the way it is in the majority of AP courses. For those of you that don't have that exposure, we probably talked a bit about our CS principles, having sort of two tasks. Create what they call a performance task they do during your course. So that's a create task, and that's worth, I think, 30% of the CSP, and then the exam is worth the remaining 70%. In CSA, the entire course is based on one two-part exam. That exam, you can see, is 90 minutes plus 90 minutes. It's written back-to-back in May, and it is 40 multiple choice questions followed by 4 free response questions. We'll talk specifically about what those free response questions will be in just a minute. You can see there's some breakdown there. So the 40 multiple choice questions are essentially broken down by units here, so you can find those percentages. I have found that that the exam is not necessarily verbatim on these percentages, but it still gives you a pretty good feel for what to focus on and how you can't blow this off. And so it's kind of covered. Now it's 40 questions. They get 90 minutes to do it. It is very intense. That 40 minutes, that 90 minutes is usually students are very tight for time because there's a lot of code reading, a lot of code tracing. So in other words, it's going to give you this program. It's going to this segment of code. It's going to tell you what does it produce after for loops. Or it's going to give you this piece of code and say which of these 3 outputs is the proper one, and some of them are very, very similar. And so there's a lot of intense, very focused thought that has to go into answering these multiple choice questions. It takes a long, long time to do them, and time is usually a factor. So that's 90 minutes long. The second section is this free response questions. And I'm just going to pause the video for a second and queue up the right location. Okay, so I'm on page 189 of the CD if you're interested in following along. So this really breaks down the 4 free response questions. Each one of those questions is worth the same amount of marks, even though they're not necessarily equally in complexity. In fact, generally speaking, they get more complex as you progress, or potentially at least the 2D array one seems to be the most complex, and the methods and control structures tends to be the easiest of the 4. So the idea is that one question is going to be getting them to work with objects and call methods related to that object. And so what they have to do in these free response questions is they have to, usually on paper, in the COVID years things have changed, they actually have to write solutions on paper with little, basically off their head. Now I'm going to show you there is something called the exam reference sheet, which gives them a little bit of information to help, but generally speaking it is completely off the top of their head. And so and subtle things are marked, right? Does your loop go out of bounds? If it is, you're going to lose marks. Does your did you put the right brackets and curly braces and anything? They usually are lenient on capitalization because people's handwriting can be different. Sometimes lenient with the punctuation if the punctuation doesn't change. But if you forget your curly braces on a Java if statement, and then that affects the what's part of that if statement. So it's really, really, really specific in how it works. So the first one is on basically writing methods. It'll give you a method. It'll describe how it's called or used, and you have to write the contents of it or something similar to that. And usually there's 2 parts to that question. Question 2 asks you usually to create the class. So it'll give you some background. It'll tell you how it works. It'll ask you to write code to basically create a class or part of a class, and then as well to make sure that the methods within that class satisfies particular outcomes. 3 is an array or an array list question. We don't know which one it's going to be. And sometimes you can actually use either one of them to solve the problem. But for sure, you're going to have to work with an array and array list. And usually they'll give you some algorithm that is unexpected, and your students have to demonstrate they understand how to write these. Most of these questions are out of 9 or 10 marks, so they can certainly get part marks on all of it, and it's usually relatively easy to get the first 3 or 4 marks out of 9, and usually quite specific to get the last marks out of 9. And in every case, there's more than one way to solve the problem. So they will accept all different types of responses. But obviously, again, you have to be pretty detailed, very careful with your your list processing. And then for sure, the last one will be 2D array, and usually or quite often that it doesn't specifically say that here. Quite often that 2D array will contain instances of other objects, so it's kind of a tough question. There's an example I like to use with students where you have a 2D array of, and I believe this is in the AP classroom, a 2D array of crossword puzzle objects. So each square is an object. So your 2D array of squares, and your squares can be a white square, a black square with a number, contains a letter, doesn't contain a letter, etc. And they have to manipulate that. So again, they are quite challenging. Now I find, because I do the CSA in my 3rd year after I've already done CSP, that my students are actually telling me for the most part that the free response half is relatively easier compared to the multiple choice part. They actually find the multiple choice part harder, or at least more intense. But that's only because my students have 3 years of program experience and a couple of years potentially worth of Java. So if you're doing all of Java in one course, or if you're doing all of CSA with beginner students, then certainly they're going to find the programming written response questions a little bit harder. Now I want to show you a couple more resources before I finish this video off. I want to talk about sort of the overall marking scheme, the overall averages you have to get the various levels of grades as best as I can show you, as well as I also want to show you something called the Java reference sheet, which is the one doc students get to help them write the free response questions. And so I'll pull those two links up. I'll pause the video and pull those two links up so we have them handy. All right. Jump there. So this document is what's called a Java quick reference. So this document is given to students as they write their exam. So it's the only kind of resource material they get during the exam. But what it does, it gives them some reminders of some of the key string methods, for example, and other methods that they can use. It reminds them a little bit about some of the math methods. It also, and this can be really useful for the array list class, how to use .add, .get, .set, and .remove. So it's one pager, but it does help. So they aren't completely unable to see old code when they're writing this stuff, but obviously this isn't going to help them much if they haven't had lots of practice. But that is a reference. It's called the Java Quick Reference. So I wanted to bring that up before we finish the video. Two other things I want to show you before we finish. One is that once you have access to your AP classroom and everything like that, you can get access to what's called, this might actually be in the public domain, you might be able to get there under their exam pages, but essentially what you can do is you can get the past free response questions. Again, they're also available through AP Classroom, and there are scoring guidelines. And what's really useful is the Chief Reader Report. So the Chief Reader Report is the chief reader is the marker, the person that marks the exams. So he or she creates a report afterwards saying, here's what students are doing well, here's what students are not doing well, here based on these particular questions, and quite often gives you suggestions on what they think that teachers should focus on more frequently in the future. Unfortunately, there's no really good view of how many marks you have to get each grade. If I click on this scoring distribution, all it tells you is that 27% of students get a 5, 21% get a 4, at least in the May 2019 version. If you're really interested in figuring out how high students have to score to get a grade, they have to go back historically. There's a few websites that kind of help you do that, but that information is not made public. It doesn't say what pure score out of 80, the 40 multiple choice and 40 free response marks gets you a 5. But some websites, and here's one of them, and I just pulled this one up at random when I paused the video, do give you an idea of what it takes to get a grade. So if I was to, and this is according to the 2016, which is one of the last times I actually released this kind of information. So let's say I gave myself a passing grade on everything, but just barely. So 20 out of 40 on multiple choice, and 5 out of 9. Again, now they're out of 10, but we'll go with there. And that'll give you a 3 out of 5. So even just reaching a 50% score in AP will assure you at least a 3 out of 5 on the marking scheme. Now, what actually happens is you'll find that getting anywhere near, usually getting near about 80% will give you a 5. So if I was to give let's say I got 32 on there. That's close to 80, I think. And maybe I'll bump these up to 7s on average. See if that's enough there to get a 5. Yep, so there we go. There's a 5. So you don't have to get 100%. You don't have to get near 100% to get a 5 out of 5. And so therefore I tell my students, don't panic. Do your best. Get as many of the part marks as you can. And obviously in your multiple choice, take your time, and you'll do fine. I tell all my students that I want all my students that are in my that have been doing this for a while. We're going to aim for a 4. If you get a 3, be satisfied with it, and then obviously those rock stars will be the ones that'll try to do everything and get the 5 out of 5. So that's kind of the general. Again, this isn't scientific. This is just based on the last release exam where they did provide some of these statistics. But it does give you a little bit of a feel for it. There's a couple other websites that are similar to this one that gives you a calculation. Okay, so that's it, everybody. So again, the big picture for the CSA exam is that it is one exam only for the entire course. It is 50% multiple choice, 50% free response. And again, use your AP Classroom for all the sample questions, lots of practice. It is quite a challenging exam. It is a hard exam, but students don't need to get 100% on the exam to get 5 out of 5, they tend to only need to get about 80% to get a 5 out of 5. So that'll keep your students motivated. All right, hopefully that answers all questions about the basics. And of course, you can always ask for more information from me later. All right, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.